Our guests, they'll be here in a few minutes, but we'll go ahead and introduce ourselves. So I'm Mia Edgerton Fulton, and I'm the co-CEO and co-founder of Scholarly Scouts. And I'm also a biomedical sciences PhD candidate at the Medical University of South Carolina. And okay.
Okay, well, my name is Donald Fulton Jr. I'm also, co-founder and co-CEO. I'm a clinical research manager at Rowan University. And I just want to, let you guys know, thank you so much for showing up today to support Scholarly Scouts and to learn more about navigating through a PhD program. Mia will go over, questions and how we'll do that as things go on.
Yep. So today, like while we have our guest, what our first guest is Maurice McCrory, and he is a PhD student at the biomedical sciences, at the Medical University of South Carolina. And then we also have Brianna Baker, and she is a PhD candidate at Columbia University. And so throughout the session today, we just want to be able to provide a networking opportunity. And you guys, if you have any questions that come up during our webinar, please feel free to drop them in the chat because we will revisit your questions after we get through going through the questions with our panelists.
Okay, so right now we're definitely gonna start with Maurice just introducing himself.
Yeah, hey Maurice.
Hey y'all, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yeah, I would apologize. My camera's not working right now, but I am here.
But
Um,
that's all right. We're happy that you're in the number.
but yes, as thank you for that introduction. But yes, I'm Maurice. I went and did my undergrad at NC State University in biochemistry, and I double majored in human biology. During a bit of my time during my undergraduate career, I worked as a EMT as well for Johnson County and Wake County as well. And um, and then I went on to apply for both MD, PhD, and PhD programs immediately post graduation from my baccalaureate degree. And eventually I landed at MUSC as my home for my PhD program.
That's incredible. And it sounds like you've had just a very incredible journey and an informed journey. So now that you gave a brief introduction about yourself, we kind of just want to know like what are some of the programs that you got into and how were you able to choose which program was right for you?
Yes. So, like I said, I applied both to MD, PhD, and PhD programs, which were two completely separate applications that had two different requirements. So, the MD, PhD required me to also take the MCAT and fill out applications through AMCAS, whereas the PhD applications were directly to those universities right out of the gate. But for MD, PhD, I applied to around 10 schools around the country. My main ones being UNC, Duke, MUSC, and University of Minnesota were my top programs for those. And then for PhD, I applied to the Mayo Clinic, MUSC, and Emory. And in terms of programs, I ended up getting into the University of Minnesota for MD, PhD, and then I got into MUSC for MD program only. And then I also got into MUSC for PhD as well separately. So I had to choose between the two for that program. And I ended up choosing to do my PhD first because I felt that it would be more beneficial to have that research experience and that background versus doing MD and then going to PhD.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing that. So, what did you do to stand out amongst other applicants, in your opinion, whether you're talking about
Um,
just PhD, MD, a little bit of both?
yeah. So I'll focus mainly on the PhD because that's where I ended up with, and I mainly wanted to go and do research field in terms of clinical research. So for those of you who are wondering why would you apply MD, PhD, and PhD, my ultimate goal focus was to develop and set myself up for a clinical research career. So for me, the emphasis was on the research first and the clinical second. And so to set myself out for a PhD career in biomedical sciences, I had a unique experience where my undergrad research was actually in plants because I went to an agriculture based school. So I did research with molecular genetics in plants, which a lot of that genetics work is translatable to humans as well, which is part of why I chose to do research in molecular genetics. But I was also upfront with my PI at the time, and I told my mentor like, I don't want to work with plants. I'm geared towards humans. That's where I'm applying to. But in addition to that, I also worked as an EMT to kind of supplement that. Okay, why are you interested in biomedical? So that I had a little bit of the medical background as well when I applied for a PhD programs.
You had it going on, Maurice. That is amazing to hear. And I know we have too some people on here who are considering the psychology PhD track, and then we also have people who have either just applied for their PhDs or thinking about it. So I guess like one of the questions for the people who have like are in the process of getting ready to apply and ready to do that transition, what are some misconceptions that you think you had about the application process?
Um, I would think the first misconception was that the PhD is expensive to apply. And I think that's because I did not know of all the sources initially until through the McNair program in my school's TRIO program. I talked with some of the counselors there who, and they were like, have you thought about asking the school for application waivers? And that was something I did not know existed at the time. And so I think out of the 8 schools I ended up applying to, 6 out of the 8 gave me waivers, just no questions asked. I just emailed them, was like, hey, can I get a waiver so that I can apply to your school? Like, I would like the opportunity to apply. And it was sent to me the next day. Um, and then, in addition to that, I think another common misconception is that when you join a PhD program, you have to do everything in a certain order and a manner. And when doing a PhD, it's not uh, a match between like, this is exactly the way you have to do it. Every person has their own way of completing their PhD. And I think that's something that you have to work out with your mentor and what is the best way for you to go about getting your doctoral degree.
That's a very good perspective. And even like just saying that, just talking to your mentor is so critical during this process. Like a lot of people, you sometimes forget that having a positive and reciprocal relationship with your mentor where you both are benefiting something is just like critical for your success. So I'm glad that you mentioned that because that's extremely important. I guess another question too that we wanted to ask you is, so what are some of the differences between undergraduate versus graduate school? I know like they're like night and day when it comes to workload, so I kind of think it's good for some of our participants to get a chance to hear about that.
Yeah, that was a big adjustment for me, I would have to say. I know specifically at MUSC where we had a core curriculum, that was a very big change of pace for me to take only one class, and I go to that class 5 days a week, but only for 4 weeks. And so it's a very rapid pace in terms of learning material. But I will say that I was happy with the amount of creative freedom I was given with my research, which is something that I did not expect because I thought initially when I joined a lab, it was going to be like, you can only work on what your mentor does and it has to be within that scope. When in actuality, my mentor sat down with me and was like, so he was like, this is the overarching theme of what I do and what context do you want to work on it in? And that allowed me to have some freedom to design my own project and my own research dissertation.
That is really wonderful points you made, Maurice, especially about kind of figuring out how you want to shape your research dissertation. That can definitely be an adjustment. So, when it comes to just preparing for like the candidacy exams and just getting ready to get your mind space prepared for that, what are some tips that you think could be helpful for some of our attendees to know about?
Um, I would say definitely read the literature and stay up to date on what's happening in your specific field because it does make when you're putting together your candidacy exam and designing experiments to know not only what direction is like the most up to date technology moving in terms of evaluating your hypotheses, but also to look at how is my research impacting the field? What is it contributing that there's a lack of in the field? So I feel like the most important thing you could do during your PhD is stay up to date on the literature.
Okay, that sounds great. One question I wanted to ask you was, how did you go about like branding yourself? I know that you know you're pretty early within your PhD process, but through LinkedIn and all these different ways that you could go about that. Like, have you started that? What are your thoughts about branding?
Um, yes, so I think that is something that is very important, especially as PhD, because our field is so heavily based on communication and networking with individuals and collaborations. So for myself, I did have a LinkedIn that I created when I started my PhD program, and I try to constantly keep it updated with whatever my most recent publications are, or if I'm giving a presentation. And then also, that was another way in terms of presentations of networking myself. So I took opportunities that I had to get out in front of people, introduce myself, present them my research that I'm working on, and that is have I've been so far networking.
And those are so wonderful things you mentioned about networking, and that's the biggest reason of why we started these types of networking opportunities, because I think it's good for our community to be able to like learn from each other and to be able to use these different points in our lives and our journeys. So do you have just some tips for students who want to start their brand throughout graduate school? Other than just LinkedIn, do you think that attending different meetings and things like that are beneficial for people when it comes to branding themselves in the PhD?
Yes, I do. I think attending meetings is a great way to do it. And I would say don't just attend like random meetings. I would say have yourself two or three consistent meetings that you go to every year where because eventually if you go to those meetings enough and you present for myself, that is the American Physiology Summit and the AHA Hypertension Conference. And so when you go and you present, you get to know people, and then they expect you at certain points to be there at these conferences. That because you have a long-standing history of you are one of the people who present at these conferences. But I also say one thing that I did not recently know of, and my mentor has been wanting me to create one, is a scientific Twitter, where you can do short little blurbs because in this day and age, it is hard to keep someone's attention. So being able to like summarize what you're working on in a short tweet, a picture of that gives a representative image of what you're doing is a great way to network yourself outside of LinkedIn.
Yes, I definitely agree, especially Black Twitter, like when it comes to Black academic Twitter.
Yeah.
Um, I've gotten a lot of opportunities through that. Just, speaking on my process of going through the PhD application because I'm applying this cycle. So, some things that I learned specifically with psychology, you might have like the SciCast or like the GradCast. That was something that kind of threw me off in preparations when it comes to application fees. You're thinking like, oh, okay, the website say $50, this, that, and third, but then it's like, oh, hold on, I gotta apply through SciCast, and SciCast say this is $80 and $40 for every application through that. And I use SciCast and GradCast interchangeably, although those two different similar platforms. But that is something that I learned, going back reviewing throughout the whole McNair scholarship thing. Just the finances and the opportunities in that, as well as going what you said with networking with conferences like ABSI, APS, APHA. Really just putting yourself out there and really network, and it really works in a full circle about a lot of the people that you reach out to, that you end up meeting later on. And you was like, oh, we inboxed on Twitter a year ago, and I was asking this and that, and now we at the same conference, and so this it's really a small world. So I definitely want to highlight the networking and just really going through the process, and also knowing that even in rejection, you can do the numbers game and say, okay, it has nothing to do with how good of an applicant I am. However, you also say that with being a good applicant as a number games, there are times where, the numbers aren't in your favor, but it doesn't mean I'm a bad applicant. But also knowing that you can be logical, but then in a certain way is always personal. So on one hand, you're like, oh, it's a numbers games, but then you're like, well, what can I do to be a better applicant? You're like, no, I'm a great applicant. Everything was good. It's just. So those are some things that I've been learning through going through the cycle, although this is my first time.
Yeah, I do think too, just when going through the application cycle and at least going through the PhD, I will say one thing that really has been helping me while getting through this process of finishing my PhD is just really staying true to myself. A lot of times it's so easy to just get lost in what everybody else is doing and what else is going on. And sometimes, you have to get to a point where you buckle down and just focus solely on what you need to do. So I'm not sure, if Maurice, if you also experienced this while going through your PhD, but I would say that's something that I can attest to.
Yeah, I can definitely say that is something that is um, what I have experienced, because a lot of time can get you can lose sight of what your goals are, because you come in with this cohort and not everyone's going to move at the same pace. And so sometimes you have some people come in and that first 3-4 months off the bat, every experiment for them is just working. And then you spend 3 or 4 months troubleshooting one experiment. And so, they end up with a lot more data than you have by the time you guys get to the same point. But you can't compare yourself to anyone else in your program. You have to know like your ethic that you're putting in, and just know that it is in your timing, not someone else's, and to not lose sight of that.
Amen.
I think it's also important to really be picky and choosy on your mentor. There's a lot of things that go into that, whether it's about, funding, because a lot of time funding could really make or break the timing you get out. You also want to think about, assistant professor versus associate professor. And not to say that all assistant professors are not, funded, but they're coming in. Some of them are working for 10 years. So just know if you get in that lab, you really gonna probably be drilling out a lot of papers. So I'm saying that, funding is something to think about. Your communication and your relationship on whether this is a good fit. Are you really interested in this research? Of course, location, about where you go to school, and the access to resources depending on your personal goals.
And yeah, like just to piggyback off what DJ said just a few seconds ago, like knowing the lab environment is just so important. And sometimes, you can't avoid everything. And I know like at least for me as a Black woman in the space, like I know for me, I have to really just be very mindful and make sure that I'm in spaces that I feel that are supporting my growth. And just when you go throughout your journeys, just really just focus on what is promoting your growth to get to where you need to be. And if it's not doing that, then it doesn't align with where you're going. So
Yep. And just to echo what was just said, like I know for myself in terms of choosing a lab, I knew coming into MUSC, which one of the reasons why I chose it is because it was a medical university where were not required to teach because I had no interest in teaching. And but I also knew in terms of choosing my lab, I wanted to do someone who worked with clinical samples because as I stated earlier, I was interested in clinical research. So I had narrowed down that list already coming into MUSC because I wanted to make sure I'm going to a place where there are spaces for me, not just because I was accepted. And in doing so, I wanted to also work with a PI who was young because I wanted to have all those publications coming out versus, I work on one project for 2, 3 years and maybe get one publication out of that project. So it's things to keep in consideration. Like, do you want to have a lot of publications when you graduate? Or are you just looking for one high impact publication? So things like that are to take in consideration when you're looking at where you would like to find for your lab home to be and your mentor when choosing them.
That's an excellent point. I think, and if you guys have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat so we can get to them before the end of the session. But one of the things that I wanted to point out too is a lot of times people go in and they don't know their graduation requirements. So they get in like fourth year and they're like, oh, I'm supposed to have a paper published or a first author paper published, not submitted by the time in order to defend my dissertation. Like those are examples. Like really knowing the ins and outs of your requirements is very important, because if you don't know, it can possibly slow down your process, and instead of completing in like 4 to 5 years, that can push you back to 6 or 7 years. But granted, like everybody's pacing and timing is okay, and it's an individualized experience, but knowing your requirements is just so important in order to be able to meet the timeline that you're looking to do.
I also want to just talk about like the hidden fees. What about like people don't think about like the library fees and healthcare. Some institutions might give you partial healthcare instead of giving you full healthcare. So I mean, depending on whether you have a family or not, it may be more beneficial to some over others. About, if you're a first gen PhD student, you're over 26, you may need healthcare. I mean, that's very important. So thinking about, okay, you said that you was gonna pay all my tuition, but why do I got a 2,000 bill? It's like, well, you didn't think about the library fees and stuff. And that's more loans that some people see fully funded, and you're like, oh, okay. But it's like, yeah, fully funded on like 20, 30K. Like you still have, to pay rent and healthcare and things like that. So
Yeah, and I think, and just going through your process too with clinical psych PhD apps, it's different from biomedical sciences a bit. I think with the funding for sure, when it comes to like make sure that these people, they can fund you at least the whole, the entire time. Like not, oh, we only fund fall and spring and not the summer. The summer's on you. Those are different things to consider when you're applying for different programs. Maurice, I don't know if you had like differences with institutions or places that you got accepted to with like how they chose to fund, but do you have any tidbits on that one?
Yes, I did. And it was for institutions where I did get interviews. It was something that I asked in my interviews. Um, and that's one thing I want to hit on too. Like, if you go for an interview, remember that they're not just interviewing you, but you're also interviewing the school to make sure that it is a fit and match for you. But in my interviews, I would ask them, what are those graduation requirements? What's your average graduation time? Like, what is expected of me in terms of funding as a student? Um, but I think there's a person who has a question as well who's raised their hand.
Yeah, I see. Go if don't mind, can you briefly just a brief introduction, and we're ready to hear your
yes,
question.
I remember Taryn. Hey, Taryn.
Hi. Hi, my name is Taryn. I just recently applied to clinical and counseling psychology programs from LA. So yeah, happy to be here. Thank you all for doing this. And I unfortunately have a work meeting at 3:30, so I just wanted to get my question out of the way. So I'm preparing myself for interviewing. God willing, I will have an interview. And I was wondering if anyone has any tips on how to get the real of like the lab culture, because I know when you're doing interviews, people are putting on like their best face. And so especially if these things are over Zoom, how can you really get like the tea essentially of what it's really like to be a student there?
So, okay, the way we'll start, we'll let Maurice go, then me, then DJ. So, Maurice, you go first.
All right. That is a very good question because that can be problematic if you don't find out the real culture of the lab. For me personally, I reached out to some of the students that were in that lab and I asked the students about like how do they feel about their lab space and currently like how is their projects going. Um, don't just email them out the blue and be like, hey, I want to know how your lab is. But like for them, I would email and be like, hey, I want to talk about like some of the research that your lab does. And usually, when you talk to them about that and their timeline and that their expectations, you can figure out what that lab environment's like.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. For me, I think having my discernment on was very, very key. If I detected, language, well, for us, we did rotation, so I got a chance to fill out people's lab environments for like a couple weeks or 9 weeks, I think. But, in those 9 week rotations, it was very easy to figure out, okay, I don't like the way so and so communicates with their students, or I don't like, that there's not organization or thorough communication amongst everyone. So it's certain things like if it's just a no for you, then it's okay to take a step back and say, okay, this isn't for me, and I'm going to look for different avenues. For me, I had to do 4 rotations in order to figure out my mentor, but it was talking and networking with other faculty, especially one of the black woman PIs that we have on our campus. I connected with her and just was telling her what I was experiencing. And so she was able to connect me with the mentor I have now. So I say just connecting with people is the biggest thing.
I'm going to say, of course, what Mari said, asking people in the lab, reaching out to faculty. Another thing is, for one AB side, it's not many people, at least at AB side, like they've been in academia, but by the end they've already let it go, whatever. So for those people that I knew that were like attending AB side or whatever those Black conferences were, assuming that you wanted a Black mentor and whatever, if it's outside AB side. I mean, I had people from APHA, but that's public health, that's a little different. But I pretty much kind of talk to the students and had quick questions or want, to kind of feel the energy to see if I feel like we could be a match or not. Because that's very important to say, hey, are they accepting this cycle? Because you could be wasting an application for that person that's not even accepting that cycle. Because a lot of times they don't always post on the website. You think they should, but they don't. So
Yes, we appreciate you asking your question, and we're so happy that you stopped by, even in the midst of having your meeting. So thank you, Taryn, for asking that question.
Yeah, thank you. I hope you all enjoy. Hopefully there's a recording. I'll watch that later.
Yes, we'll upload it on YouTube, so we'll have a link for you.
Okay, perfect. Thank
All
you.
right,
Bye,
no
everyone.
problem. Did anyone else have any other questions before we go ahead? I was gonna say give the
I can jump
benediction, but
in for a question.
oh, but
The
hey,
benediction.
hey.
Hey, my name is Kyrie, and I've completed my master's in biotechnology from Morehouse School of Medicine, and we're looking into getting into PhDs. I have spent a lot of my time in industry though, and not so much in academic labs. So I was just wondering if any of you guys could speak on kind of the differences in the environment of the lab environment in general, because I just don't have as much experience being in that kind of lab space.
I'm glad that you mentioned so I guess I'll go first and then let Maurice go. So I'm glad you mentioned that you have that industry experience because you have a lot of transferable skills that will allow you to thrive very well in academia. So I think, when you're with your process, you can really focus on the transferable skills that you have that set you up to be able to handle the workload of a PhD. So you know how to manage projects, you know how to meet deadlines, you know how to do all these different things. But I will say, when the difference is with industry, you finish your work, you go home. With this in academia with a PhD, me and Maurice, we are in the lab because we work. Our labs are next door to each other, so we work and we're in the lab like a lot of weekends.
A
But
lot of weekends.
yeah, so you go ahead, Maurice.
But yeah, so I would think, yes, of course, with you coming from an industry background, you're going to have those skills already, the lab skills. You're going to have the ability, to multitask and manage multiple projects. It would be selling yourself as more so what they would consider an academic, like research, because you have an end goal of wanting to forward knowledge. And I think that's like the biggest difference between what you look at in terms of industry research versus academic research, where you're wanting to increase the knowledge base for everyone, whereas industry is more towards geared towards like a profitable sort of knowledge. But that would just be in terms of, I think the most difficult transition would probably be the writing part. But other than that, I would think that you would be fine balancing. But like Mia said, in academic research, you kind of bring your work home with you a lot of times. So
Yeah, so but I think this was a very great session. I really appreciate you, Maurice, for coming. Thank you for your questions, and please stay connected with us. We're on LinkedIn. Thank you for asking your question. How do you pronounce your name again? I don't want to say it wrong.
Kyrie.
Kyrie, that's
Kyrie,
pretty.
that's so pretty.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for coming. And we really just enjoyed just networking with you. And Maurice, one love, man. Thank you so much.
thank y'all for inviting me to speak.
Absolutely. I hope y'all have a wonderful evening, and we'll have the clip uploaded on YouTube. So stay tuned for that one.
All right. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.